It's been 45 years now since H.R. Giger's iconic eyeless banana-headed skull piercer made its debut in Ridley Scott's masterfully shot tale of blue-collar truckers in space versus a surprise interspecies pregnancy in 1979's Alien. The series has run the gamut throughout its near half-a-century lifespan thus far, spawning board games, toys, a proposed Saturday morning children's cartoon, countless comics and novels, video games, a live stage show, a forthcoming live-action television series, and of course a whole host of subsequent films that, with the exception of the film's first sequel Aliens, have divided fan opinions across the board on almost every single occasion. Opinion is pretty much unanimous that none of the sequels, prequels or crossover films have managed to come close to matching the excellence of those first two entries, although most are not without their charms. 3 and 4 are indeed flawed, but they do still provide two uniquely nihilistic and goofy entries respectively to the film's original Ripley storyline, and Prometheus, for all its confusing shortcomings, did have a solid foundation of new world-building lore and Lovecraftian-inspired creature design that somewhat managed to tap into that feeling of stepping into the great unknown that first film did so well. It's been 7 years now since the series last hit the big screen, with a rather disappointingly handled Alien Covenant, particularly disappointing given that it was directed by Ridley Scott again. The film's wrapping up of Shaw's storyline from Prometheus and the expansion of the alien creation lore did leave a sour taste in most fans' mouths, and the bounding CGI alien in the film's climax reduced the once terrifying beast to nothing more than a weightless insect. Most agree that the 2014 video game Alien Isolation is the closest thing quality-wise to those first two films. It wisely sets itself only a few years after the original Alien and absolutely nails the retro-futuristic aesthetic that made that first film so visually iconic, whilst also taking the series back to its roots and absolutely making the titular beast terrifying again. So, enter Fede Alvarez, whose previous accolades include the grisly and gruesome Evil Dead remake and the pretty tense and creepy Don't Breathe, to take a leaf out of that game's book and bring the filmic Alien experience a little bit closer to its humble beginnings in the series' first post-Disney buyout film. Set somewhere in the 57-year gulf between the series' first two films, the strangely titled Alien Romulus seeks to marry the claustrophobic terror of the first film with a little of the action of the second, while saturating itself in the dirty, rustic, retro aesthetic of the first film as well. The director also stated that he sought to restore the physicality of the creatures by using practical effects wherever possible to bring them to life. I became curiously intrigued and relatively optimistic when watching the initial teaser trailer some months ago, when I saw just how good the design aesthetic was, combined with the comments from the director that he wanted to distance this film from the grandiose philosophical nature of Ridley Scott's prequels. It looked very much like the film's intentions were to strip back the unnecessary baggage that those films, particularly Covenant, carried along with them, and deliver something lean and efficient story-wise that plays on the series' biggest strengths. Ghost ships in space, dark corridors, slimy viscera, body horror with gross sexual symbolism, and rogue AI. The film starts with a pre-title sequence of a Weyland-Yutani vessel capturing something from the wreckage and debris of the first film's Nostromo, before we cut to our daydreaming orphan lead Rain, played by Callie Spaney, and a somewhat defective android called Andy that she treats as a sibling, who both reside and work on a very bleak-looking mining colony planet that is run by, you guessed it, Weyland-Yutani. The planet never sees daylight and looks like a pretty dystopian existence where the only way you can leave is by fulfilling a contracted amount of hours working in the mines. Her request to leave is denied as the amount of contracted hours she needs to fulfill is suddenly increased exponentially. It's not long before she's drawn into a risky mission with a bunch more young workers to hijack a supposedly decommissioned Weyland-Yutani vessel floating past the planet's orbit to steal some cryotubes for their own ship. What could possibly go wrong with that plan? I had my reservations about how young the cast looked in the original trailer and how relatable they'd end up being, but they actually had a lot of chemistry, I found, and I felt that they were better fleshed out than any of Covenant's forgettable bunch. The film sets out their motivations for trying to escape their pretty dystopian existence, and there's not too many of them either. If anything, they could have got away with one or two more for a bit of extra fodder. David Johnson's portrayal of Andy, the stuttering android, was very nuanced and one of the film's biggest highlights for me. The trailer made it seem like Rain was going to be built up to be another Ripley-style character, which seems to be something that the series struggles with getting right, but I was pleased to see that this was actually handled much better than I expected. She and most of the other characters come off like a decently written and relatable bunch for the most part, with the exception of one or two stupid decisions towards the final acts that felt like unnecessary plot contrivances that undermined logical character motivations. But to be honest, they weren't as bad as some of the contrivances in Prometheus and Covenant, and didn't take me out of the film too much. There were some pretty tense set pieces, a couple of them involving rooms full of facehuggers that I really enjoyed, although I do feel like some of the tension could have been milked a bit more from some scenes, particularly the ones involving the xenomorphs, who were a little too underused in general, I thought. Although the practical effects work on them and the aforementioned facehuggers was pretty great. Oh, and the chestburster scene is amongst one of the series' best. It's very visceral and palpable, and for the first time we get to see a glimpse into the growth cycle of the xenomorph in an equally visceral piece of sexualized horror imagery that would surely make the late H.R. Giger smile. The design work in general is top tier in this film. You can tell there's a real love for the aesthetics of the first film and a formidable level of craft and dedication into fleshing out that film's world, from the industrial nightmare of the colony planet to the 70s futurism of all the tech and sound design, including all the beeps and mechanical clicks of the computers and their green-on-black CRT screens. The only real misstep for the most part was the decision to have a CGI'd face of one of the station's decimated androids. It felt out of place visually with the rest of the design choices. The other design misstep for me was in the film's final act that I don't want to spoil, but it again also felt out of place to me. I got the feeling that it was trying to put a different spin on more of the previous entries' ideas, but I didn't think it worked as successfully here. Although I know some fans would disagree that the same idea was even a successful one originally. I also found some of the fan service lines of dialogue to be a little on the cheesy side, and not all that necessary given how well the film manages to play visual fan service in a slightly more subtle way through the design choices. Nevertheless, these gripes are actually pretty minor, and didn't derail or hamper my enjoyment of the film on the whole. Whilst it could have gone harder in some scenes, amped up the tension in a couple of others, and maybe gone a slightly different route for the final act, Alien Romulus is still a solidly paced blending of suspense, sci-fi inflicted horror and action that may not come all that close to the quality of the first two films, but certainly manages to be more consistently entertaining, cohesive and engaging than the prequels, and at least on par with the flawed but decent third and fourth films.